there, this is John from Heroes and Legends. Welcome to part 1 of our 6-part Kaladesh full set review. Today we're looking at all of the white cards as well as the Azorius cards and the Orzhov cards that are in the set. Quickly, before we get started, just a quick reminder, if you check out the description below, there's a link to our Amazon affiliate store, and if you make any purchases through those links, a small percentage will come back to help the channel. So thank you in advance for checking that out. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the cards. We have a lot to discuss. If you've never watched our set reviews before, we're going to look at each card individually. We're going to talk about that card's role in the limited format, and whenever applicable, we'll discuss what it potentially could do in constructed formats as well. Now, before we get into individual cards, just quickly, I just want to give you my thoughts on white in general as a color. What I like about this set, and this reminds me a little bit of what I saw in Conspiracy as well, I don't feel like you're really tied into a certain color combination or a certain mechanic to go all in on in the draft. It feels like there's a lot of different things you could do. It feels like any color combination is viable and could actually be good and potentially win in a draft pod, and that's actually pretty cool. For the last couple of years, we've been seeing sets that felt like you have to really zero in all in on a certain strategy or mechanic, and if you start to draft that and then it dries up, you're having a bad day. Where this time I feel like you could start in one direction, and if that particular strategy dries up, you could just slightly shift into something else, and it doesn't mean the cards you've already picked are useless. So I do like that. For example, if white is being paired up with blue and you're building an Azorius deck, there's a lot of flicker effects, there's a lot of bounce effects. It's a very controlling color. You have a lot of counter spells, a lot of small creatures that can get damage in early with evasion, and then hopefully keep getting damage in while you counter and use other grindy sort of effects to drag out the game a little bit. White and red is Boros, all about aggression, and not only is it about a lot of small creatures, dwarfs, there's even a dwarf lord in the Boros colors, but they play very well with vehicles as well. Vehicles, I mean, they're artifacts, they really fit into any build, but it feels like you get the most advantages maybe for playing vehicles if you're in the Boros colors. If you're in white and black in Orzhov, for example, you're going to see a synergy between all the fabricate creatures. Both colors are very heavy in fabricate. White has some flicker effects to help you get better use out of those fabricate cards, and black has a lot of cards that are asking you to sacrifice an artifact. So again, getting the additional servo tokens to sacrifice can help power out some of the black cards, which is kind of cool. The Selesnya colors, white and green, are all about a lot of small creatures, but also fabricates and counters. That's what those colors are trying to do. Fabricate, flicker the fabricate, turn things into creatures that are a little bit bigger by exchanging energy for counters, that type of thing. So as you can see, no matter what color combination you pick, it's very viable with white. White's a very good support color in some ways, but they can also be super aggressive too, which is a nice kind of duality you'll notice to some of these cards. So having said that, let's get into the cards. We're going to start off with Acrobatic Maneuver. This one I like a lot for limited. First off, it's a common flicker effect for your own creatures, which means there's going to be a lot of copies of this floating around. You'll be able to get a few in your deck if this is what you want to do. It also replaces itself, and it's an instant. I mean, phenomenal. I mean, this does everything you want it to do. The fact that it's an instant is nice because you can also use this as a combat trick. So if somebody's attacking in, you can go ahead and flicker maybe a fabricate creature. All of a sudden it changes the combat math, and they didn't see that coming. That's actually pretty cool. So very versatile, good limited instant. Next we have Aerial Responder, and this is a real deal. This card is phenomenal. So first off, very reminiscent of Vampire Nighthawk from Zendikar. If you ever played with that card before, you know that it was extremely powerful in Zendikar Limited. It still sees play today in Commander decks and cubes all over the place. At the time, it was also even played in Standard. This card is going to be very similar. This is going to feel great to play in Limited. This is probably very easily a first pickable card a lot of the time. It's just so efficient and so good. Flying, Vigilance, Lifelink, all for 3 mana on a 2/3 body, and it's a Dwarf Soldier, which is going to matter sometimes too. So keep that in mind. But overall, I do think this could see some standard play this time, because I do believe there's going to be a more aggressive build that does make its way into standard, and perhaps it's a Boros build, maybe it's a Dwarf style deck or something like that, but I do think this will get there. And yeah, if you happen to get this in limited, you're gonna have a good day. Next we have Ether Storm Rock. This is a good limited creature, especially if you're playing a slower controlling build. Maybe you're in the Azorius colors or something like that. But first off, a 3/3 flyer for 4. I mean, those stats are just fine for limited to begin with. But then when this enters the battlefield, you get an energy counter that's kind of nice. And as long as you have energy to put into this, when it attacks, it gets a +1/+1 counter. And it also can prevent one of your opponent's creatures from defending, which is kind of nice if they have like one flyer on the board. This can just kind of get around it as long as you have the energy to put into it. And potentially, this could be attacking in the first time as a 4/4, maybe even next time as a 5/5 if you have the resources. So that feels pretty good. This could be kind of a win condition sometimes in those decks that are trying to stall out the game a little bit. Again, I think this is relegated to limited because it costs 4, but it'll be decent in a lot of builds there. Angel of Invention. This is the first mythic of the day, and this is actually a pretty good one. Now, first off, you look at the 5 casting cost and the 2/1 power toughness, that doesn't feel good, but then you read the rest of the card and you feel a lot better. Flying, Vigilance, Lifelink, Fabricate 2, and an Anthem effect. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I mean, the weakness of this card is it can be fragile, especially if you decide to make the servo tokens, you want to go wide. And yeah, sure, it can be taken out probably pretty quickly, but at the same time, I think you can find enough value in the meantime to make it worth the 5 mana. So look at it this way. If you're playing the more control style deck, then you probably want to have the 4/3 Flying, Lifelink, Vigilance, and you want to get in there for damage and maybe have a nice size blocker and gain the life. If you're playing that more aggressive wide deck, like perhaps the Boros deck or something like that, then you probably want to get the servo tokens and pump tokens, or if you're playing Orzhov, for example, take the tokens, sacrifice them for other abilities. So it's just kind of cool because it depends on what your strategy is, but it fits into a lot of different strategies, and I really like that kind of design. Having said that, here's the awkward part when it comes to standard. Right now there's just so many good white creatures, especially at the 5 spot. I mean, it's competing with Avacyn directly, and I think that's going to hold it back a little bit. It may see some standard play in the future, like perhaps after rotation. It could still see a little bit now, but I think we'll see a lot more in the future. And as far as limited goes, though, yes, this is a bomb. This will be really awesome to play in limited. Authority of the Consuls, another card that kind of fits in a couple different style of decks, which I find very intriguing. It's cheap, 1-drop, works great in a limited build, again, that's trying to be a little more controlling, because if you're a control deck, slowing down your opponent by making their creatures coming in to play tapped and gaining a little bit of life off this could be very, very important. Another place where this shines is, again, in an aggressive style deck, because in a mirror matchup against 2 aggressive decks, gaining life and slowing your opponent down, even if it's just a little bit, could help you win a race. So I just like the duality of a card like this. This will be good in limited if you're in those strategies, and I do think this could potentially cross over into standard as well. I feel like there will be a control deck out there. Don't know if it's Azorius or Bant yet, or what it will exactly look like, but I feel like with this set we got the pieces to get there, and this card could show up as a 1-drop in that deck. Also, if a Boros or another type of aggressive deck with white makes it into the meta, this could be in the sideboard to deal with the mirror match. Aviary Mechanic. It's actually a really good limited card. So it's a 2/2 for 2 with some upside. If I play it on turn 2, wonderful. I got myself a very serviceable 2/2 creature. However, if I draw this card later in the game, I have a chance to still garner some value out of it. It does allow me, if I choose to return a permanent I control to my hand. So if I play this for 2 and I have a card that has a good enters the battlefield effect on it, it allows me another chance to possibly play it. And like I said before, there's some good ones. I mean, there's Fabricate cards, there's cards that give you energy when you put them onto the battlefield. So there's a lot of good effects out there that this could play very well with. So nice card with upside for limited. Built to Last. A good combat trick in limited. I like 1 casting cost combat tricks. This is 1 casting cost. Give something +2/+2. And if it happens to be an artifact creature, it's indestructible. Sign me up. Happy to run 1 or 2 of these in my deck. Captured by the Consulate. This one's interesting. It's sort of like a pacifism effect, kind of, because the creature can attack. But notice the creature can still block, so take that into account. But what's cool about this, the upside is, your opponent can't really target another creature without targeting this thing. So in other words, if they have spot removal, all of a sudden they can't use it on your creatures anymore. It has to hit this creature. Or if they have a combat trick, it's got to be played on this creature. And that can really kind of mess things up. Now, here's the downside you want to keep in mind. This does cost 4. It's a little bit of a mana commitment. The ability's good, though, for what it costs. But we've already seen what a flicker effect and a bounce effect in the set, and we're like, what, 5 cards in? So as you can imagine, there's a lot of bounce, a lot of flicker in this set, which makes these pacifism style cards a little less good, especially if you're paying more for them. Now, granted, if you're not going up against white or blue, you got a better chance of this thing sticking around longer, so maybe you board it in those matchups. But you have to take into account that this might not be around a long time. Now, it's not a bad thing, because a few things could happen when you play this card. One, your opponent may be forced to just use their spot removal on their own creature. That's great if that happens. That's probably the best case scenario, right? It could potentially be bounced, and if that's the case, it's still a tempo play. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world for 4 mana. It could be flickered. That's a little bit less good, because that's a little more efficient for your opponent. But in the end, this will somehow go away. Now, if you play this thinking it's not going to stick around forever, but this is going to be a tempo play for me, and maybe I can just get across and do what I want to do for a turn or two and not have to worry about spot removal or a combat trick, well, that's a little different. That's where this card will shine for you. So definitely still very playable and limited. Don't get me wrong. I still think it's a really good card. But just be very thoughtful about how and when you play it, because just keep in mind, it probably won't be around forever. Cataclysm Gearhulk. This is another mythic, and this one's the real deal. This card's awesome. This whole cycle is awesome. It's completely blown me away, and I think most people would say the same thing. This one, hey, I'll pay 5 for a 4/5 Vigilance creature in limited. I'll be happy to do that. Oh, and I also get a Cataclysm effect on top of it. Sign me up. It's awesome, right? So these type of effects are great if you're behind. If you're losing the game and you need to catch up, maybe your opponent's going super wide, hitting you with servo tokens, all sorts of crazy stuff, you can play this and completely reset everything. That's actually kind of awesome. And if your opponent keeps their best creature and you keep your best creature, which in many cases might be this one, 4/5 Vigilance is pretty decent, you may have the advantage to be able to stabilize and start coming back. That's kind of cool. If you draw a card like this in your hand and you allow your opponent to overcommit while you slow roll a little bit, and then you play this, that could be good enough to win the game sometimes too. So this is going to be great for you in limited. You'll be happy to play it. I mean, there will be times where you'll be ahead and you'll draw this card and you're like, I don't want to play it. But that's fine, because you're already winning, and then if something goes wrong, you still have it in your back pocket. So it will be great in that situation as well. Yes, I think this will see standard play. I think it's good enough to get there. I'm not sure exactly what the deck will look like, if it's just simply a control deck or what have you, but yeah, I do think the power level is there. Consulate Surveillance. This is fine for you in limited. Again, this is another good card if you're being aggressive and you're trying to race. It costs 4, which feels a little expensive for an enchantment, but you are getting 4 energy. That's quite a bit of energy in one shot. And then if nothing else, it allows you to prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn by a source of your choice twice. So this is really nice if maybe you have a bunch of small creatures or a couple flyers that are like 2/3s or something like that. You're attacking in the air and your opponent has that big 6/6 or 7/7 on the ground. Well, now you can continue to race without having to worry about getting beat down by the large creature on the ground. So you can use this to nullify that damage for a couple turns and hopefully win that race. Not going to be for all decks, but if you have a lot of small creatures with evasion, this could do some work. Next we have Consul's Shield Guard. This is fine and limited. I mean, nothing to write home about. Cost 4 for a 3/4. You do get 2 energy, so that might be good, especially in like the Selesnya deck or the Azorius deck where there's some better energy payoffs. And this, yeah, sure, when it attacks, you can pay energy to make something indestructible. That could be relevant too if you're racing again. So it makes sense in that deck, maybe a little more than some others too. So it's a good card. It might not always make your cut, depends on what you're trying to do, but it is just fine for unlimited. Eddie Trailhawk. This one's another good limited card. I don't mind paying 2 for a 1/2 flyer. Sometimes they don't quite impact the board state enough though, especially in some builds. But this time, again, you're getting 2 energy, and Perhaps maybe you take that 2 energy and a couple times you can give something else flying. Maybe a large ground pounder will get flying a couple times, and again, just might be good enough. But what puts this over the top for me is it's a 2-drop, and it's a fairly good 2-drop. Again, when you build your limited decks, you really want to go relatively heavy on 2-drops. It's an important part of your curve, probably the most important part of your curve. So when I see a 2-drop with enough upside, especially at the common level, and I know I'll be able to get my hands on some, I'm usually pretty excited about that, so I think this is very playable. Fairgrounds Warden. This feels a lot like Fiend Hunter in a lot of ways if you played with that back in the old Innistrad, the original Innistrad block. This is good. Just like Fiend Hunter, it's going to come into the battlefield, it's going to exile something that's problematic, at least for a period of time. Fiend Hunter saw play in Standard back in the day, so this potentially could see Standard play again. It was great in Limited. No doubt this will be very good and limited as well. Again, though, this is a slightly different format than the original Innistrad was. This time you have to be aware of all the bounce spells that are out there, especially in blue. So again, this might be a card that you just play as a tempo play. Just think of it that way. Hold on to it until you know you're going to be able to get immediate value, then play it, get rid of the biggest blocker or the biggest thing that's in your way, attack in, and hopefully get some immediate damage, so that way if it does get bounced, you still got value out of the card. That's just how you think about it, but it's still a very good card. Fragmentize. This one's kind of amazing to me. Okay, first off, let's talk about limited. It's not going to take care of every threat. I mean, if someone plays the 10/10 Colossus, this isn't going to do anything for you. But it is going to deal with a lot of stuff. It's going to deal with a lot of small artifacts or smaller artifact creatures. And for 1 mana at the common level, this will be abundant and it will be very, very good for you in limited. This is good enough to cross over into standard, even if it is out of the sideboard. This will definitely see some standard play. As far as eternal formats and modern, I think this will be a sideboard card there as well. Once you get into those formats, really, how many artifact enchantments are you playing for more than 4 typically, right? Very rarely. So this is going to take care of pretty much every single thing that your opponent could put out. If you're playing against those style decks, Affinity or anything like that, this is going to be phenomenal for you. I mean, even think of Vintage, all the mana rocks, like the Moxes and stuff that are out there. This deals with a lot of problems and can really set your opponent back. So I do think this will be a thing in just about every format, quite honestly. Fumigate. This is the board sweep for the set. Wizards is out of the business of making 4 mana board sweeps, at least for right now, in Standard. Wrath of God won't be in the set, unfortunately, but Fumigate's fine. If you don't have a 4-drop, then a 5-drop board sweep is fine. There's no problem with that. They try to give you a little bit of an upside since you're paying 1 more mana, and actually the gain life is not a bad upside for a board sweep because you're probably playing this in a control build, and control builds don't mind gaining a little bit of life. And let's face it, there's a lot of go wide strategies, a lot of servo tokens and stuff in this set, so playing this, you actually could get yourself a fair amount of life at times. Much like the Cataclysmic Gearhawk we talked about earlier, this is another card that will help you come from behind, or just something you can kind of hold into your hand and slow roll your opponent a little bit. There's just a lot you can do with a card like this. So yes, it probably fits best in that Azorius, more controlling, slow style build, but it will be good for you whenever you're playing white and limited, and I do think it will cross over into a control deck and a standard as well. Gearshift Ace. This is a good limited card. I mean, 2/1 first strike for 2, that's good enough to run in my limited deck. Great 2-drop. But on top of that, if I'm playing with vehicles, I get the bonus of being able to tap this, turn on the vehicle, now the vehicle has first strike. That's actually kind of awesome for 2 mana. So again, vehicles play best in the Boros build, but it doesn't have to be the Boros build. If you're playing some vehicles and you're playing white in another color and you have 1 or 2 of these, you're definitely going to find some super value there. Glint Sleeve Artisan. Fine limited card. There's not a whole lot to say about this. Paying 3 for a 3/3 is good. That's actually pretty good body size for a 3-drop. Plus, the Fabricate gives you the ability to instead go wide with a 2/2 and a 1/1. So yeah, I mean, not a whole lot to say about it. Just a good bread and butter limited card. Herald of the Fair. So very similar to the previous card. It's a 3-drop that's just a good bread and butter limited card. Not a whole lot to say about it. These are the cards you play when you don't have any jaw-dropping 3-drops, right? And they both have enters the battlefield effects, which are important in this set, obviously. So there you go. I mean, 3-2 for 3, just fine. And if I give something +1/+1, a lot of times that will whiff, but if it hits, hey, gravy on top. Impeccable Timing. This only costs 2, and it's at the common spot, which is important to note. And this will deal with some small threats in combat. There's a lot of small, aggressive creatures that are very good. So if I'm playing a slower style deck, I need to defend myself on turn 2, turn 3 from these little 2/1s and 3/2s that are coming at me. This is a card that will allow me to survive the early game and get my feet under me for the mid to late game. So it's going to be very good in that style deck. But let's face it, this is actually pretty good removal in white no matter what I'm trying to do. Inspired Charge. This is another reprint, originally from Magic 2011. I think I saw a reprint Magic 2015 and then in Battle for Zendikar. So it hasn't been that long since we've seen this card. It's fine and limited. It's a nice instant speed combat trick that's going to affect all of your creatures. It's best when you're on the offensive in a wide deck. So you have a bunch of servo tokens and a lot of little creatures. You just want to go in for the kill. This is going to do it for you. I don't mind running 1 or 2 of these in my deck if that's my plan. But if I'm not in that strategy, then you're probably going to skip this one. Master Trinketeer. This card's actually pretty cool. Again, 3/2 body for 3, but this time you're getting tons of upside. This is one of those jaw-dropping 3-drops I was mentioning. So it's a Dwarf Artificer, so that could matter some of the time, but also giving your servos and Thopters +1/+1, and also having the ability to create 1/1 tokens for 4 mana. That's actually pretty huge when it gets to the late game, because sometimes just that alone could overwhelm your opponent to the point where you could come back and win. This card's phenomenal. So great card to play in limited. Standard, the only thing that's a little awkward is there's so many really good Anthem effects out there right now that this feels a little narrow compared to some of the others, and this only hits servos and Thopters where we have just blanket Anthem effects that will just be a little bit better. Granted, this does allow you to create more tokens, but it is a pretty big mana sink that you might not be able to afford to do necessarily in some of the other constructed formats like Standard. So I don't know if it's going to make the crossover there, or at least not for a while, maybe in the future post-rotation, but it's still a fantastic limited card, and I feel like this could be a really fun commander card too. Ninth Bridge Patrol. This doesn't feel good to me. I love 2-drops, but this isn't doing it for me. I don't want a 1/1 for 2. I get it that when anything of mine, creature-wise anyway, leaves the battlefield, it gets a +1/+1 counter. And I understand there's tons of flicker effects, bounce effects. If something is destroyed, exiled, you name it, this gets a counter. But here's what I don't like. I just think it's too slow. I played this on turn 2. I got myself a 1/1. Okay. Great. Then maybe at some point one of my creatures dies, and now it's a 2/2. Maybe I can flicker something to get some sort of fabricate advantage or something, and alright, now it's a 3/3. By the time it gets up to, say, being a 4/4, there's going to be like some 5/6 creature on the other side of the battlefield that can block it. It's just way too slow and situational, and just it doesn't feel very efficient to me. I'd skip this one. This one feels like a trap to me. Pressure Point. This one is a reprint from Fate Reforged. I was never real fond of it in Fate Reforged. I tried to make it work, and I tried to play it, but it just never seemed to do enough. It does replace itself. I mean, that's cool. It's an instant. That's cool. If you're super aggressive and you have a lot of little creatures, you could play this, try to tap down something to get in more damage, but at the same time, would it just be better to play another creature if that's your strategy? That's kind of what I feel like. So I'm not saying it's unplayable. If you're in that strategy, maybe throw one of in, try to make it work, but I think most of the time you probably skip this one. There's just better things. Propeller Pioneer. This is a good limited card. It costs 4 for, think of it this way, potentially a 3/2 flyer. That would be good, right? So consider that. Plus you have the ability to instead get yourself a 2/1 flyer and a 1/1 if that's better for you. So that flexibility, definitely worth the 4 mana in limited. Next is Refurbish. I like this card a lot. Now in limited, it's kind of nice to, maybe in the mid to late game, you'll have a stocked graveyard and you've lost some good artifact creatures, or maybe they have some good enters battlefield effects. You can just choose the best artifact in your graveyard and turn this card into it for 4 mana. That actually seems pretty good to me. I think this will see some standard play. I think somebody's going to brew something interesting with this, because there are some good reanimation targets with this. Anything from Gearhulks to the 10/10 Colossus that we're going to talk about in a few days. There's a lot of things you could hit with this. I guess it's a matter of tweaking maybe some of the existing Delirium decks to try to work some good artifact creatures and this into them. It could be another interesting win condition, so I guess we'll have to see if it's efficient enough. If someone can figure out how to make it fast enough and efficient enough for standard, I think it could potentially get there, at least the power level's there. Now, when you talk about modern and eternal formats and stuff, I think there's just more efficient ways to reanimate in those formats, so I don't really see this making a big splash necessarily there, but I do think it could see standard play, if nothing else. Revoke Privileges. Here's another pacifism style effect. Costs 1 more than pacifism, however it gives the additional ability that the creature also can't crew a vehicle, which could be very important in this format. Like I said about the other effects like this, you do have to keep in mind there's a lot of bounce spells out there that could mess this up a little bit, or blink spells that can mess this up. So because of that, it's not going to be flat out removal, not be all end all, get rid of a problem. It is going to be more of a tempo play, and that's fine. If you think of it as a tempo play and you play around it accordingly, this is still a very good card. Servo Expedition. This is fine if you want to go wide. It's not as exciting to me as cards like Raise the Alarm, which can also work as combat tricks because they're instants, but obviously there is a deck out there that wants as many tokens as fast as they can get them, and that's why this is here. If you're not in that deck, you can probably skip this one. Sky Swirl Harrier. Serviceable limited creature. It's a 5-drop flyer, so yeah, flying's good. 3/4 flyer for 5 doesn't feel super exciting. You really want that in this day and age to be maybe a 4/3 instead or something like that, but I'm happy enough to play it if I need something at my 5 spot. Sky Whaler Shot. Now this is good removal. This is probably the best white removal in the set. This is premium. Basically, you're getting rid of anything power 3 or greater for 3 mana at instant speed, and you get to scry 1. Yeah, that's awesome. This is great in limited. You'll be very, very happy to play it in white, or even this is splashable. Like, I would splash white to play this. It's probably that good if I'm desperate for some removal effects. It's good enough to see play in standard. It will definitely make the cut there. The only thing that's a little awkward about it is what's maybe one of the strongest creatures right now in the standard environment. Emrakul. Unfortunately, this can't touch Emrakul because it has protection from instants. So that's a little weird, but it's still very good. Taweled Dromedary. Limited card. Basically, this is for the slow, grindy decks. You need to defend yourself against the hyper-aggressive decks. So those first few turns, you need to fend off the 2/1s and the 2/3s and the 3/2s that are coming at you. That's why this exists. If you're in that business, you'll be happy this card's there and you'll play it. If you're not, you'll skip this one. Thriving Ibex. This is okay at the 4-drop. I mean, this is a little better if you're trying to add energy. If you have good energy payoffs, then all of a sudden this card feels a little bit better. But this is another one that lets you get a permanent +1/+1 counter when it attacks in. So, okay, I get 2 energy. If nothing else, that gives me perhaps a decent blocker. This card's a little slow. It's probably a little bit better as a defender more than anything. You're not always going to want to play this, but if you need a 4-drop in some builds, it'll be fine. Toolcraft Exemplar. Now, this is a good 1-drop. Here's what's cool about this card. First off, 1-drop, 1/1, sure. But if I have an artifact, now it's a 3/2. If I have 3 artifacts, also gets first strike. But perhaps I can attack in on turn 2 with a 3/2. That actually feels pretty good, right? Now, this would work best with equipment more than anything, and there's only 1 piece of equipment in the set, so that feels a tad bit awkward maybe. But the equipment works well with it. We'll see it in a few days, but it's a 2 casting cost, 2 equip, +2/+0, so like nothing crazy special or anything. But it does make this card a little bit better, so if you can play with the 2 of those cards in limited, you'll definitely find some value there. But even if you don't have the equipment, I mean, just playing other cheap artifacts makes this a worthwhile 1-drop. I think this card has more potential to shine in standard, where you can construct a deck around it and play with some better equipment cards and stuff like that. And I kind of feel like this card will probably see some play in an aggressive build. And beyond that, I do think this is modern playable. I mean, that's a format where you have a lot of really good cheap equipment like swords and stuff like that, right? This could really shine there. And also, even the Eternal formats. I mean, think about Mox's powering this out as a turn 1, 3/2. It feels like the potential is there for some aggressive decks to want to play something like this in a lot of different places. Next we have Trusty Companion. This is actually a good 2-drop, I think. Now, red is usually the color that gets the clause that it can't attack alone, but there are a lot of small creatures this time in white. This is going to play very well in a Boros deck as well, with a lot of small aggressive creatures there too. It will hopefully always have a partner to attack in with, but even if it doesn't, maybe you're playing a slower, more controlling deck, for example, less creatures, you know, a 3/2 blocker for 2, which later could be an attacker, it's actually not that bad. And it has vigilance too on top of it. So I feel like you're getting your money's worth here for 2 mana. Visionary Augmenter. This actually is a pretty good limited card. I mean, I've played a lot of green cards that are 4/3 vanillas and felt okay with them in limited. This takes it a step better. First off, it's a white card. You don't always see this kind of power push in white. Usually a 4 casting cost white creatures, usually a 3/3. So this time, yeah, you could get a 4/3, or else you get the 2/1 with the 2 tokens, which, again, that flexibility is also powerful in itself. So I like this card, actually. It seems like a good 4-drop. Wispweaver Angel. So here's another flicker effect. This one's at the uncommon level. Now this costs a little more, but it also gives you, of course, a 4/4 flyer. Now paying 6 for a 4/4 flyer, I think we've been spoiled, as I feel like I only want to pay 5 for this. But it is uncommon, and the flicker effect can be pretty powerful in these colors. So you want to be careful not to like draft too many of these things because they cost 6. But having one of these at the top of your curve, you'll probably find some value for sure. And you know what? 4/4 flyer in the limited game is still extremely powerful and probably worth the 6 for that alone. Alright, let's move on to the Azorius cards. We have Cloudblazer. It's a little reminiscent of Muldrifter. Muldrifter is still, of course, a better card, though, because you have the evoke ability on that card, so you can pay less to just get the card draw, or you pay the full price to get the card draw and the creature. This time you don't have that option. You have to pay the full price to get the card draw, the creature, and 2 life. So, yeah, you know what? That's still very good at limited. I mean, the card draw can be huge for you, and a 2/2 flyer sometimes even is just good enough in a limited game. So, I like it. It's going to be fantastic there. As far as standard goes, maybe it could see play maybe in an Azorius style control deck because the card draw is relatively significant. The only problem is it's 5 mana. It's competing with a lot of good stuff right now. So perhaps this is something that gets brought into standard post rotation. Again, it's directly competing with like Avacyn and some other really good cards. So you do have to take that into account. But if nothing else, it is a good limited card. Next we have Dovin Baan, and this is a serious control planeswalker here. Now I've been kind of mentioning that the control style deck I think will make a comeback in standard. I mean, we've seen pieces in the past that have been sprinkled in, things like Scatter to the Winds and Spell Queller and Reflector Mage, and this set is just bringing a lot more to the table, and this is a big part of what I think could really push this deck from being a possible thing to a very probable thing in standard in the future. This is a fantastic control planeswalker. Let's talk about limited first. I mean, this is going to be a bomb in limited. Most planeswalkers are, right? But as far as standard goes, I mean, you play a card like this and you have a couple ways to go about it. First off, he can defend himself with his +1 ability, so that's good. But secondly, his -1 ability, you know what? If that's all he does, that might be good enough. I mean, you just sit there and you draw a couple cards and you gain some life. In a control deck, that's actually very, very important. I mean, look at Jace Beleren. I mean, how many times have you played a Jace Beleren and that's all you've done is minus him and just drawn a few cards? This time you can basically do the same thing, but also gain life on top of it. Exactly what a control deck wants to do. Very, very powerful. If you happen to kind of play the long game with this and get to the ultimate is going to close a lot of doors on your opponent as well. It's not an automatic win. If you're already behind, it won't catch you up necessarily, at least not right away, but it's really going to slow down your opponent quite a bit with that static orb style effect that's very hard to deal with. So yeah, this is the real deal. Definitely we'll see standard play. Now, as far as Modern or some of the Eternal formats, I don't know if it's going to cross over there just because there's so many other really good and really strong control style Planeswalkers. It's competing with things like Jace Beleren and Jace the Mind Sculptor and a few others. So because of that, I don't know if it really will make the crossover. But it will see Commander play. It's also a really cool cube card. So this will see play in a lot of places. All right, let's move on to a couple Orzhov cards. The first one is Cabal, Consul of Allocation. This only costs 3 for a 2/3. It is a legendary creature, so it can be a commander, and it also can be a tiny leader, so keep that in mind. And it has a nice one-sided effect that can gain you a little bit of life and sort of attrition your opponent down a little bit. I really like this card. I feel like I don't know if it has a home in Standard just because I'm not really sure what deck it fits into. But again, the meta is going to change very drastically, so it may find a home. I just can't think of one off the top of my head right now. But the power level's there, regardless. Playing this in Limited, I think, will be really, really good for you. Great size for what you're paying for, and a fantastic one-sided effect. You'll really be happy to play it there. And this is an awesome Commander card. Really, really awesome. It plays well with a lot of strategies that already exist in Commander, and I would assume so. I haven't played a lot of tiny leaders in my life, but I think it would be really good there too, as well as Commander. Good cube card too, I think. So I love the art. I mentioned that a lot when this card was previewed. It reminds me a lot of the art on Hand of Justice from Fallen Empire, which is one of my favorite cards. Fortunately, this is a much better card than Hand of Justice, but the art's incredible too. Restoration Gearsmith. This is interesting. This is basically a Gravedigger that lets you pick between an artifact or a creature to return to your hand, and that's good. I mean, you're picking your best thing out of those two categories out of your graveyard to return to your hand. That's a nice advantage, as well as a 3/3 body for 4. It plays really well with what Orzhov is trying to do as well. If you're in those colors, black is trying to sacrifice creatures. Now, granted, white and black both have a lot of Fabricate, so a lot of times you can just pitch a servo token to get the power out of the card. However, if you don't have the ability to do that, then you may pitch an artifact and play this to get it back. So there's definitely some synergy there with what those colors are trying to do. Totally makes sense. I think it'll be a good limited card. All right, having said that, those are all the white cards as well as the Azorius and Orzhov cards in the set. We'll be back tomorrow with all the blue cards, and we'll look at some more of the multicolor cards as well. And we'll keep working our way through the set all week long, and we'll wrap things up with a pre-release primer right before the pre-release begins, and hopefully get you ready for that event if you're going. So hey, until then, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.